Grammar is something that many students are afraid of, but this fear is totally baseless. The problem lies in the fact that we tend not to pay attention, we don't like to focus, and here is the difficulty. I am sure if you listen to my discussion on the new topic that we are starting today, it is on narration, and if you focus, you pay attention, and then you do the exercises that I give at the end, then I am sure you will find grammar not that much difficult. You may enjoy grammar also. So one of the important topics in grammar is narration. Narration, the word means telling something, describing something, that is narration. In grammar, narration means that some statements or some sentences or some words spoken by someone, when it is changed into a different form. For example, if someone says something, if you quote it, if you tell it in the same way as he said without making any changes, that is one kind of narration. That is called direct narration. And when you make necessary changes and then you reproduce his statements, his words, without changing any meaning, with changes in grammar, with changes in the structure of the sentence, then that is called indirect narration or reported speech. So direct narration, indirect narration. Indirect narration is also called reported speech. So now the main question is, when we change narration from direct to indirect and vice versa, what do we change actually? What does change of narration mean? If you start listening to me from the very beginning and pay attention to everything I say, I told you earlier that you will find grammar to be something easy. When we change narration from direct to indirect and from indirect to direct, we make four major changes. We make changes in four major things. We will discuss these four changes in this introductory video. In this video, we are not going to practice or discuss about how changes are made. In this video, we will focus on what are the changes that we make. And the number of changes that we make when we change narration is 4. In 4 things, we make changes. Remember this thing, we make changes in 4 things when we change narration, and these 4 changes are, see here, change of narration involves changes of 4 things. I told you earlier, 4 things are changed when we change narration, and this is highlighted, 4 things we change. First is change of punctuation marks. Punctuation marks we change when we change narration. And what is this change of punctuation marks, and then what is actually punctuation marks, this we'll discuss later. Second change is change of tenses. From one tense, if in the direct narration it is in a particular tense, when we change it into indirect narration, we make a different change. We change the tense in the direct narration and we use a different change in the indirect narration. Then we change pronouns. For example, if it is I, it may be he. If it is you, it may be he. If it is your, it may be his. In this way, we make changes of pronouns when we change narration. The last change is other changes. Here, a lot of things are there. We have to pay much attention. When we say other changes, there are changes in vocabulary, there are changes in place expressions, there are changes in time phrases, many changes. We will discuss everything in detail. So 4 major changes we make when we change narration. Again, let us see, you can write them down in the notebooks. 4 changes we make when we change narration. The first one is change of punctuation marks, then the change of tenses, third one is the change of pronouns, and other changes, 4 changes, other changes. We will discuss in details about all these things. Firstly, we will discuss on change of punctuation marks. Here we see how punctuation mark is changed. I have made a small table. You see here 2 parts are there, direct narration and indirect narration. This means that in direct narration there will be inverted commas. You all know these things. We also call it quotation. In direct narration, the words spoken by the speaker is they are put within inverted commas or quotation, and inverted comma is a must in direct narration. When you change it into indirect narration, there should be no inverted commas. Remember this thing. In direct narration, inverted comma is a must, and in indirect narration, there should be no inverted commas. One thing that I often tell the students, and they often make mistakes again, is that when you change into direct narration, then as I have written, there must be inverted commas. This means that you start the statement made by the speaker with inverted commas, with quotation. Once you start something with a quotation, it means that somewhere else at the end of his statement, you have to unquote it. You have to again put inverted commas. If something begins with inverted commas, it should end with inverted commas. We often find many students, they start something with inverted commas, but at the end they don't put this thing. You have to pay much attention to it. You have to be very careful about it, that in direct narration, inverted comma is there. With the inverted commas, the statement of the speaker begins, and when the speaker's statement ends, you have to again give inverted commas. This is called quoting and unquoting. The second important point is full stop, question mark, and mark of exclamation. These three things we find in direct narration. In direct narration, the sentence may be in assertive form, imperative or interrogative or exclamatory. In any form it may be there. And if it is in assertive or imperative form, then there will be a full stop at the end. If it is in interrogative form, there will be a mark of interrogation, a question mark at the end. If it is in exclamatory form, then at the end of it there will be a mark of exclamation. So we have written that in direct narration you will find any of these three things. There may be a full stop, there may be a question mark, there may be a mark of exclamation, depending on what type of sentence it is. Fine? But the most important thing is that in indirect narration you will always give a full stop. Whether it is a question mark or a mark of exclamation or a full stop in the direct narration, whatever it is, in indirect narration you will always use a full stop. Why? Because when you change a sentence from direct to indirect, in indirect narration the sentence is always written in assertive form. Whatever be the form of the sentence in direct narration, assertive, imperative, interrogative, exclamatory, anything, in indirect narration we always write it in assertive form. That's why whatever be the mark, the punctuation mark at the end of the sentence in direct narration, question mark, full stop or mark of exclamation, in indirect narration at the end you will always put only full stop and nothing else. So two important points we have found here so far as change of punctuation mark is concerned. The first point is that in direct narration inverted commas are must, and in indirect narration there should not be any inverted commas. Number one. Point number two is that in direct narration at the end of the sentence within inverted commas you will find either full stop or a question mark or mark of exclamation, and in indirect narration there will be no inverted commas, and at the end you will always use a full stop. This is all about change of punctuation marks. This is the change number one. We have discussed that there are four major changes we make when we change narration. This is the first point, change of punctuation marks. And now we will see change of pronouns. This is how pronouns are changed. You must pay very much attention. See, direct narration and indirect narration, two parts are there. In direct narration, if there is a first person word, what is a first person word? In first person we have two words, two pronouns, I, we. I is singular, we is plural. I, we is the first person, are the first person words. And I is called the subject form. Its object form is me, and its possessive form is my. So I, me, my together. Then coming to we is called the subject form. Its object form is us, and its possessive form is our. So I, me, my, we, us, our. These are all first person words. If you find any first person word in the direct narration, any first person word, then when you change the narration into indirect narration, in place of these first person words, the change will be that in the indirect narration you will write subject to the reporting verb. That is again a very important point. What is this subject to the reporting verb? When you find a question in narration, for example, Ram said, I am ill today. Ram said, I am ill today. What did Ram say? His statement is, I am ill today. This statement of the speaker, that is called reported speech. That is reported speech. And outside the quotation, there is a subject, there is a verb. The subject is Ram and the verb is said. This Ram is the subject of the reporting verb. The verb outside the quotation said, that is reporting verb. And Ram is the subject to the reporting verb. So in place of any first person words in direct narration, when you change it into indirect narration, in place of that you have to use subject to the reporting verb. If the subject to the reporting verb is a proper noun, for example Ram, as I have said, it will be changed into he. Or if it is a feminine gender, it will be changed into she. It will depend. When we discuss these things, when we will practice these things, this will be very clear. Now you write them down in your notebook, try to understand, and when in the next videos we will carry on our discussion of different types of sentences, then these things that you are writing now will help you. The second thing is that if you find a second person word in the direct narration, for example you, your, then in place of second person word, when you change into indirect narration, you have to use object of the reporting verb. In direct narration, objects are not always available, but when such sentences are there, you will find an object. If you still don't find an object, you will make one suitable object of your own. These things we will discuss when we practice the things. And the interesting thing is that if there is a third person word in the direct narration, then in the indirect narration the third person word will remain the third person word. There will be no change. This thing is very important because we often find students who have made some kind of ideas like, if I is there in the direct narration, in indirect it will become he. No, I does not always become he. Remember, there is nothing like this that I will become he. Because if you say, yes, I can become he, there are sentences, for example, he said, I am ill today. I will become he here. He said that he was ill. I will become he, but this is not the case always. If I say, I said, I am ill today. I said, I am ill today. I said that the I will remain I then. So, the main point is, the formula is that in direct narration, if you find a first person word, when you change it into indirect narration, this first person word will be changed into subject to the reporting verb. Subject to the reporting verb, that will come in place of the first person word. If there is a second person word in direct narration, when you change it into indirect narration, in place of the second person word, object of the reporting verb will be used. But if the word is third person in direct narration, then it will not be changed. These are very, very important things. You write them down in a notebook, try to understand. You can watch this video several times, and when we will actually practice in our next videos, these things will become more clear to you. Our next change, actually this change of pronoun should have come at the in the third place, but as I have mentioned, we have discussed it earlier. Now the other change, the next change is the change of tense. This is how change in tense takes place. You see, many of you know this thing also. If you find a sentence in simple present tense in direct narration, this part is direct narration. If in the direct narration there is a sentence in simple present tense, it will be changed into simple past tense in direct narration, in indirect narration. Then, if the sentence is in present continuous tense in direct narration, in indirect narration it will be past continuous tense. If the sentence is in present perfect tense or simple past tense in direct narration, I repeat, if in the direct narration you find a sentence in present perfect tense or simple past tense, then in the indirect narration you will change it into past perfect tense. The next thing is, if you find a sentence in present perfect continuous tense or past continuous tense in direct narration, in the indirect narration you will change it into past perfect continuous tense. And the last point is that if it is shall or will, it means a future tense. If it is shall or will, and In the indirect narration, it will become would. Shall and will both will become would. And other verbs like can will become could, may will become might, must will become must or had to. In this way, changes will be there. And these are the way how tenses are changed. And all these things will become more clear when we practice these things. So our next change will be other changes that I have categorized. These were the changes which I have categorized as other changes. But before we discuss other changes, one important point that I need to tell you that I missed actually, that is that when we discussed about the change of tense, that from what tense in direct narration we will change into what other tense in indirect narration. One very important point is that the change of tense will take place only if, I repeat, the change of tense will take place only if the reporting verb is in the past tense. What is the reporting verb? I have told you that outside the quotation there is a subject and a verb. That verb is called reporting verb. Ram said, I am ill today. This said is reporting verb. It is in the past tense. If this reporting verb is in the past tense, then only the tense of the reported speech, the tense of the statement within inverted commas will be changed. Otherwise, there will be no change of tense if the reporting verb is not in the past tense. Remember, this is very important, and we will again find it, we will discuss it when we will practice. Coming to this last point, other changes, let us see what are these other changes. One change is changing time phrase, one change is place expressions, one change is the verb. Time phrase, what are time phrases? Now, today, tomorrow, these are the words that refer to time. So if in direct narration you find the word now, in the indirect it will become then. If it is today in the direct narration, in the indirect narration it will become that day. If it is tomorrow in direct narration, in the indirect narration you will write the next day or the following day. If you find the word yesterday in the direct narration, in the indirect narration you will write it as the day before or the previous day. If in the direct narration you find these words, they refer to place. Here will become there, this or it will become that. Let, if it is for example, let us play football today. Such expressions you have. In place of let, in indirect narration it will become suggest or proposed. These words you will use. If you find the word sir or madam, then in place of sir or madam you will replace this sir and madam, and then you will write the word politely. For example, he said to me, sir, will you help me? He politely asked me, you have to say. You have to remove the word sir or madam. In place of sir or madam, you have to use the word politely. And again, if you find such words, for example, sorry. Sorry, for example, you find, this is number 9. For example, in direct narration, you find the word sorry. It will become regretfully. Regretfully, you will write in indirect narration. Okay? And then there are several other words whose change also you will make as per the need. One is sir and madam will become politely, and then sorry will become regretfully. And there are some other examples which when we will discuss, you will find in elaborate details. And my request to you, all of you today, is that you watch this video several times and write all the things I have written on the board down in your copies. Try to understand, and you will understand it better when we start practicing. In our next video, we will start with assertive sentences. There are 5 types of sentences, you know: assertive, imperative, interrogative, exclamatory, and optative. And there are several tenses also. So different types of sentences and different types of tenses we will start discussing. In our very next video, we will try to change the voice of assertive sentences. And when we do it, all the knowledge that we have gathered today, all the discussions that we have made today, all these things will be very much needed. So before we go for the next video, before we start discussing on the change of narration for assertive sentences, you be ready with the knowledge that we have that we have got today and the discussions we have made today. Watch the video and make yourself knowledgeable and get ready for our main discussion on. This is only just an introduction. Main discussion will take place in several other videos. So wishing to meet you soon in the next video to discuss more and more on narration. Thank you very much for being with me.